Yousef, I would like to touch upon an extremely important topic, and this is the climate change, because we do witness extremely huge crisis, especially in Australia right now. Also, of course, in LA we saw wildfires, but they're not comparable to what we're seeing in Australia. A few weeks ago we saw the water in Venice, and that's pretty disappointing. First of all, I've been interviewing many international guests from US, Europe, and almost each point of the world, and each and every one of them has very different opinion. For example, US citizens, they do not really consider the climate change as an issue, but it's probably normal considering President Trump's behavior on this topic. So I was wondering, what is your opinion in regard to this topic as a whole?
Well, certainly climate change is a major global challenge. And I think everybody would agree that the world needs to act to curb carbon emissions, whether it's the oil industry, whether it's the renewables, or even the nuclear industry. The Paris Agreement was signed by more than 190 countries, and they all pledged to curb their carbon emissions by the year 2030. But the challenge with the climate change is there needs to be who will pay the cost for carbon mitigation, and there needs to be agreement on a global carbon price. Currently, we see carbon markets only in Europe trading at about $24 for carbon per ton, and this is certainly not enough to achieve all the carbon reduction targets in Europe. Other countries, even here in the Middle East, are thinking of establishing a regional carbon markets. I believe also in South Korea they have their own national carbon markets. So having, number one, an effective carbon trading mechanism is extremely important to achieve carbon emissions. Achieving an economic viability of energy transition is extremely important, and that's why we see oil and gas continue to play a major role in the global economy. What we saw, for example, in the last UN Climate Summit, when Greta Thunberg has spoken about the need to move away from fossil fuels. Certainly, we understand the environmental concerns arising from the continued reliance on fossil fuels. However, we also have another challenge, is that there is more than a billion people living on Earth who still lack access to electricity, and more than 3 billion people who lack access to clean cooking fuels. And fossil fuels will be currently the only way to alleviate energy poverty in the next 10 to 20 years. However, I think that, and that's my personal opinion, that the oil industry and the oil industry, oil and gas, and even the coal industry will need to, number one, make green use of the resources, enhance the use of carbon capture and storage, because carbon capture and storage is the only technology that will enable the oil industry to achieve carbon targets, or to reduce their carbon emissions by a large extent in the years forward. And number two, moving towards a circular carbon economy, whereby all the captured carbon will be converted into other useful products or being re-injected for enhanced oil recovery, which is currently the case in some countries around the world, and they have achieved economic gains out of this application. So climate change certainly is an issue, and the world will need to find feasible and economic solutions to meet that challenge.
Certainly, as many scientists said, this is going to be a process of at least 50 years, but I was wondering, do you think, for instance, Europe is very ESG investments focused? That's for sure. It's much ahead compared to the US or any other continent. So do you think in the long run this might have any negative impact on the oil industry?
So you mean energy transition?
Exactly.
Well, I think oil and gas, according to many projections coming from OPEC, from the IEA, that they will oil demand will continue to grow until the year 2040, but we may see an energy transition or a peak demand in oil after 2040. That's talking only for the case of oil. That doesn't include natural gas, of course, because natural gas is considered as a low carbon fuel. I think where the oil industry will have to adapt for any possible changes in the industry moving forward. You can see that many companies, oil companies, are changing their business models to become an integrated energy company. Many companies are thinking of the projects of oil to chemicals. So not necessarily oil will be used only in the transport sector as we see now. With the wide spread of electric mobility and cheaper batteries, because as you know, batteries are becoming cheaper. And one also important thing is that even the engines of current vehicles will be more efficient in the next 20 years. And in fact, they will be responsible for the more reduction in demand than EVs themselves. So certainly demand for oil after 20 years will not be the same as demand for oil now because of the enhanced efficiency. And I think the oil industry will have to consider alternative uses of oil in order to maintain a cleaner and more sustainable use of making that a strategic commodity.
And you know that many investors divested their capital from the energy sector and the energy stock, especially in the United States, because there was